The golden doors of Buckingham Palace closed behind closed minds on February 1st. What happened inside those marbled halls would reshape the monarchy in ways the public wouldn't fully understand for months. A meeting, tightly guarded. No press, no leaks. Just senior royals, constitutional advisors, and institutional guardians convened around a table that had witnessed centuries of dynastic decisions. But this time, something shifted, fundamentally. Princess Anne stood at the head of the room, not as a subordinate, not as a supporting player, as the architect of what came next. The Princess Royal, that indomitable force of quiet authority, had called this meeting herself. And when Anne moves, the institution listens. She has spent 50 years proving that duty isn't performed, it's lived, and she recognizes it in others with an almost supernatural clarity. King Charles sat across from her, visibly tired. The cancer treatments had taken their toll in ways no official statement could adequately convey. His face showed the strain of attempting to lead an institution while his body demanded retreat. Every breath seemed calculated, every movement deliberate. Beside him sat Queen Camilla, polished as always, her hair perfectly arranged, her jewelry precisely positioned. But something in her expression suggested she sensed what was coming. She was not prepared for it. Nobody was. William and Catherine occupied the opposite end of the table. Catherine wore pearls, simple, understated, the kind of elegance that doesn't announce itself, but rather whispers with absolute authority. William's jaw was set with anticipation. He knew why they were here. He had been part of the planning. But seeing it unfold in this formal space, with all the weight of institutional history pressing down from the gilded ceilings, was something else entirely. Anne didn't waste time with preamble. She never does. The woman doesn't do ceremony unless it matters, and this mattered more than most things had ever mattered. "We're stalling," Anne said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade wrapped in velvet. "Charles is managing an illness while attempting to perform a role that requires full presence. Camilla has retreated from substantive duties. William and Catherine are carrying the weight of the institution on their shoulders. While we pretend it's still business as usual, it's not, and we both know it." She paused. Let that sink in. The silence in the room became tangible, almost suffocating. Catherine hasn't simply stepped into the void. She's filled it with grace, she's done the work, she's carried the symbolism, she's restored public trust in a family that was hemorrhaging credibility just years ago, and she's done all of this without the formal recognition that such labor deserves. Camilla shifted slightly in her seat. Her fingers tightened around her pen. The gesture was small, but it spoke volumes to those who understood the language of royal body language. Anne continued, her voice steady and measured. "I've watched her for years now. I've seen her at 3 in the morning preparing briefing notes for diplomatic missions. I've watched her hold the hand of a dying child at a hospital visit and mean every second of it with genuine presence. I've seen her rebuild the monarchy's image through sheer consistency and character. I've watched her navigate impossible situations with intelligence and compassion. And I've asked myself the same question repeatedly. Why does she wear borrowed tiaras? That's when Anne played the card that would reshape everything in the coming months and years. Catherine deserves a crown of her own. The room froze completely. Camilla's expression hardened visibly, her carefully maintained composure showing the first signs of strain. One of the private secretaries actually gasped, catching himself mid-breath. William leaned forward slightly, his shoulders tightening with emotion he was clearly attempting to control. Catherine's face remained composed, but her hands trembled almost imperceptibly. She hadn't expected this. Nobody had, despite the quiet groundwork that had been laid. Charles opened his mouth to speak, but Anne raised her hand. She wasn't finished, not by a long measure. Not a ceremonial piece inherited from the past. Not a consort's adaptation of something designed for someone else entirely, a crown designed specifically for her, commissioned by this institution, crafted to reflect who she actually is, not who tradition expects her to be, a crown that says, we recognize what she's already carrying. We're simply making it official. We're acknowledging reality. Camilla found her voice. It was sharp, controlled, dangerous in its precision and underlying fury. The queen consort crown already exists. I am still queen. There will be no new crown. There will be no elevation of Catherine that diminishes the standing of the crown I hold, and I will not accept terminology that suggests she represents the full authority of this institution. That is my role. That is my title. That is my position." Anne's eyes didn't waver for a single moment. They remained locked on Camilla's with the intensity of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The crown consort you hold represents a position. Catherine represents a future. Those are fundamentally different things. One is ceremonial, one is actual, and the monarchy cannot survive by honoring ceremony over reality. "They are not different," Camilla responded sharply. "Title matters, symbolism matters, precedent matters. If we begin rewriting the rules of succession and recognition every time sentiment shifts, we lose the architecture that holds this institution together. We become subjects of popular opinion rather than stewards of tradition." "The architecture," Anne replied, her voice dropping slightly but gaining intensity, "was designed for a different era, an era of empire, an era of unchallenged authority, an era that no longer exists. We're not rewriting rules, we're acknowledging reality. Catherine is already performing the role of the crown's moral center. She's already doing the work. We're simply giving her the symbol to match what she's already carrying." The tension in the room became almost physical. One of the advisors who was present later described it as watching two women arm wrestle with institutional power using nothing but words and will. It was a battle conducted entirely through language, yet every word felt like a blow. Charles finally spoke. His voice carried the weight of a man trying to maintain authority from a position of diminishing strength. "Anne, I understand what you're saying. I recognize Catherine's contribution completely, but Camilla's point about symbolism and precedent isn't without merit. Crowns carry legal and constitutional implications. We can't simply commission one without thinking through the precedent we're setting. We need to consider the constitutional implications. We need legal advice. We need to be careful." "We're not setting a dangerous precedent," Anne said, her voice remaining steady. "We're correcting an imbalance that's been festering for years. Catherine has been performing sovereign duties without sovereign recognition. That's not new. That's broken, and it's time to fix it before it breaks the institution itself." William, who had remained silent until this point, finally spoke. His voice was calm, but carried absolute conviction. "My wife didn't ask for this. She's never sought elevation. She's never demanded recognition. She's never played the political games that this position normally requires. But my mother would have recognized what Catherine represents instantly. She embodies what the monarchy needs to become, a symbol of service, not spectacle, duty, not dominion, grace, not grandeur." The mention of Diana shifted something in the room fundamentally. Anne nodded slightly. William had understood the deeper point. This wasn't about Catherine as an individual. This was about what the crown itself needed to become to survive in the modern world. Catherine herself remained quiet. She had perfected the art of silence over more than a decade of public life. Speaking could be weaponized, words could be twisted, but her silence was its own form of communication. It said, "I'm ready. Whenever this institution decides to acknowledge what I've already been carrying, I'm ready. I'm not fighting for this, but I'm prepared to accept it." The meeting continued for another 2 hours. Camilla dug in on various points, cycling through constitutional arguments, historical precedent, and personal objections. Anne held her ground with the kind of quiet determination that comes from knowing you're right. Charles attempted compromise solutions that satisfied nobody. William offered strategic support, adding weight to Anne's position without making it about personal ambition. Catherine said almost nothing, but her presence in the room spoke volumes. By the end, an uneasy consensus emerged. A crown would be commissioned. Camilla's objections were formally noted in the meeting minutes. The design process would begin quietly, away from media scrutiny. A timeline would be established. Estimates suggested completion within 18 months, but nothing would be announced publicly until the design was finalized and approved. The political victory had gone to Anne and, by extension, to Catherine. But Camilla had secured something too. She had forced the process to be slow, deliberate, and carefully documented. She had ensured that this crown wouldn't emerge without significant institutional debate. In her own way, she was fighting for the relevance she felt slipping away. When the meeting concluded, Catherine walked out of Buckingham Palace into a cold February afternoon. Photographers clustered at the gates, but she gave them nothing, no smile, no wave, no indication that anything had changed. She was perfecting the art of carrying enormous shifts with absolute exterior calm. It was perhaps her greatest gift to the institution. Others sought credit. Catherine sought only to serve, and in that fundamental difference lay her power. Behind palace walls, the machinery began moving with the kind of precision that centuries of institutional operations had perfected. Calls were placed to Gerard & Co., the crown jewelers who had crafted ceremonial pieces for generations. Their workshop had created crowns for monarchs from George III onward. They had seen empires expand and contract. They had witnessed the slow transformation of royal power from absolute to constitutional. They understood better than most that crowns were never simply jewelry. They were statements. They were political documents. They were embodiments of institutional philosophy. Preliminary design briefs were circulated among a carefully selected group of advisors. Consultations began with art historians, constitutional scholars, and symbolic theologians. The vision was beginning to take shape in late-night meetings conducted in secure palace rooms. By late February, the first sketches emerged, not leaked through unauthorized channels, not handed to eager journalists, simply circulated among the most trusted advisors. Platinum framework, Cornish diamonds sourced from ethical suppliers in British mines, sapphires from Queen Mary's private collection, a central ruby symbolizing service and sacrifice. The design philosophy was radical in its restraint, less crown as instrument of dominion, more crown as expression of purpose. The craftsmanship was being approached with unprecedented care. Every detail had symbolic meaning. The platinum was chosen because it was lighter than gold, symbolizing strength without burden. The Cornish diamonds were selected specifically to honor local British heritage and craftspeople. The sapphires from Queen Mary connected Catherine to a lineage of strong women who had navigated institutional life with intelligence and grace. The central ruby was handpicked for its particular hue, a deep red that suggested both passion and restraint. Gerard's head designer, a master craftsman named Thomas Wellington who had been trained in the most exacting traditions of royal jewelry, approached the project with almost religious intensity. He understood that he wasn't simply creating an object, he was creating a symbol that would be studied by historians for centuries. Every curve mattered. Every placement had significance. The public began to sense something was shifting, even if they didn't have the full details. Social media erupted with speculation. Hashtags began trending with increasing intensity. Catherine Crown, New Windsor, the future sovereign, she carries the crown already. News outlets started analyzing what this might mean for succession, for the monarchy's evolution, for Catherine's actual constitutional role within the institution. The British press, normally restrained about such matters, began running increasingly bold speculation. One BBC correspondent wrote a piece suggesting that Catherine's ascension represented the monarchy's answer to a changing world. She wasn't ascending through bloodline or traditional succession. She was ascending through demonstrated capacity and public trust. This was a crown earned, not inherited, and that was revolutionary. Meanwhile, Camilla's retreat began with almost orchestrated precision. Nothing dramatic, nothing public that would seem like a forced withdrawal, just a gradual stepping back from major engagements, fewer state banquets, fewer press appearances, more time at private residences, more time reading in libraries, more time with her own children and grandchildren. It was the institutional equivalent of a slow fade, not a dramatic exit that would trigger scandal, a measured withdrawal that allowed face-saving while simultaneously confirming what everyone already understood. Catherine was ascending, Camilla was retreating. The shift was institutional, not personal, inevitable, not vindictive. The palace's official line remained carefully neutral. No confirmation of a crown, no timeline announced, no formal statement about Catherine's actual role within the institution, just careful silence that spoke volumes to those paying attention. Constitutional scholars dissected every non-statement. Journalists pursued every potential source. Palace press officers perfected the art of saying nothing with impressive precision. But in the Commonwealth nations and across the global media landscape, a narrative was already crystallizing. The princess without a crown was becoming the most powerful symbol in modern royal history, because she had power without asking for it, authority without demanding it. Leadership that didn't need to be formally recognized to be fully real. She was leading the institution by example. She was reshaping the monarchy through service. She was becoming something the British royal family had never quite seen before. A queen who hadn't been crowned yet, but was already reigning in hearts. By early March, Polling showed over 80% of the British public supported Catherine receiving her own crown. In Canada, polling reached 87%. In Australia and New Zealand, similar numbers emerged. The Commonwealth nations, which had begun questioning the relevance of the British monarchy, suddenly found themselves invested in its future through Catherine. She represented something that transcended traditional royal symbolism. She represented the future they wanted their institutions to embody. International observers noted the shift. In diplomatic circles, Catherine was increasingly referred to as the monarchy's bridge to the future. She spoke the language of modern compassion. She understood environmental concerns. She navigated mental health conversations with genuine empathy. She represented a new kind of leadership that valued human connection over hierarchical distance. Anne's role in this had become increasingly public, though she would never have sought such attention. The Princess Royal began accompanying Catherine on official visits. She positioned herself visibly beside Catherine at Commonwealth meetings. She was, in effect, publicly endorsing Catherine's ascension. And because Anne's credibility was beyond question, her support shifted the entire institutional narrative. In late March, during a Commonwealth Health Forum in Singapore, Catherine delivered a speech on generational leadership that seemed to crystallize everything. She spoke about the responsibility of leadership without arrogance. She discussed the weight of tradition without being trapped by it. She articulated a vision of monarchy that was grounded in service rather than spectacle. The speech went viral, not because of production quality, but because of the truth it conveyed. People recognized themselves in what Catherine was saying. They recognized the future they wanted. When she returned to the UK, the momentum had shifted definitively. Even media outlets that had been skeptical of the crown concept began running positive pieces. Fashion magazines analyzed what the crown might look like. Historians wrote think pieces about Catherine's place in royal lineage. Children's books began featuring stories about princesses who earned their place through kindness and dedication. By April, design consultations were finalized. Gerard & Co. had created a prototype that would be presented to Catherine privately. The crown was smaller than traditional state crowns, designed to be worn for multiple occasions rather than relegated to display cases. It was approximately 4 inches tall, featuring the platinum framework set with precisely positioned gems. The Cornish diamonds caught light in a particular way that created an almost ethereal glow. The sapphires from Queen Mary's collection were arranged to suggest both continuity and innovation. The central ruby seemed to pulse with its own light, a visual metaphor for the heart of service that had guided Catherine's life. When Catherine first saw the prototype in a private viewing at Buckingham Palace, she wept. Not dramatically, just quiet tears that suggested she understood the weight of what was happening. She understood that this crown represented an institutional acknowledgement. It was recognition. It was validation. It was love expressed through gemstones and precious metals. By May, the palace released an official statement, carefully worded, deliberately measured. It announced that a commission had been undertaken to create a personal crown for Catherine, Princess of Wales. The statement noted that this reflected her significant role within the institution and her service to the Commonwealth. No specific date was given, no reference was made to Camilla's opposition, no constitutional changes were announced, but the statement was there, official, real, undeniable. The response was almost instantaneous. Within hours, trending topics shifted entirely. Every major news outlet led with the story. The Commonwealth High Commissioners issued statements of support. Public figures ranging from actors to politicians to activists praised the decision. The crown became a symbol of institutional evolution that people could rally around. Camilla's response came through a carefully drafted statement released through Clarence House. It noted that she supported Catherine in her role, that she recognized Catherine's contributions, and that she welcomed the commission as a reflection of the modern monarchy. It was a masterclass in face-saving language. To the public, it sounded like support. Institutional insiders understood it as capitulation. Camilla had lost. She was acknowledging that loss while maintaining her dignity. In June, the palace announced that the crown would be formally completed by early 2026, with a public debut anticipated for that year's Commonwealth Day celebrations. The timeline gave the institution months to prepare, to manage media expectations, to craft the narrative around Catherine's ascension. William began appearing more frequently at official functions, and Catherine appeared alongside him, increasingly taking a visible leadership role. Together, they began representing the monarchy's future in a way that was both constitutional and emotionally resonant. They were being positioned, deliberately and carefully, as the next generation of royal leadership. By late summer, preliminary sketches of the crown design were officially released. The response was overwhelming. The design was modern without being trendy. It was elegant without being ostentatious. It was precisely what Catherine needed it to be, a crown that reflected who she actually was. Art and design publications ran extensive analyses of the symbolism embedded in the crown. Academic papers were commissioned. Museum curators began planning exhibitions analyzing how this crown represented the evolution of royal jewelry. It became not just a crown, but a cultural phenomenon. Catherine herself remained characteristically composed throughout. She continued her charity work. She continued her family life. She continued serving the institution with the same quiet dedication that had brought her to this moment. The crown didn't change her. It simply acknowledged what she already embodied. By autumn, even the most skeptical observers had to acknowledge the shift. The monarchy had evolved. Institutional change, which normally took decades, had happened in a matter of months, and it had happened not through dramatic proclamation, but through quiet, deliberate, intelligent maneuvering. Princess Anne had orchestrated a masterclass in institutional transformation. She had recognized that the monarchy's survival depended on embracing women like Catherine, women who led through service, women who didn't seek power but earned it through consistent dedication, women who understood that modern leadership was about connection, not dominion. By winter, as Christmas approached, Catherine was featured in the official royal Christmas broadcast. She stood in the gardens at Sandringham, not in a palace. No sash, no formal regalia, just Catherine speaking with genuine warmth about service and family and the importance of human connection during dark times. It was the most watched royal Christmas message in years, and it crystallized what had been building all year. Catherine wasn't just a princess, she was becoming the moral center of the modern monarchy. When 2026 arrived, anticipation built toward Commonwealth Day. The crown, completed in all its detail and glory, was prepared for its first public appearance. The symbolism was profound. This wasn't a coronation in the traditional sense. No ceremonial anointing, no religious blessing of kingship, just a quiet, powerful acknowledgement that the woman who had already been carrying the weight of the crown deserved to wear its symbol. On Commonwealth Day, Catherine appeared in public wearing her crown for the first time. It was simple. It was elegant. It caught the light in a way that seemed almost metaphorical. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. This was what they had wanted. This was what they needed. A monarchy that recognized its finest representatives. A crown that meant something beyond tradition. The historical significance wasn't lost on anyone paying attention. For the first time in modern British royal history, a crown had been created not as a tool of absolute authority, but as a recognition of earned respect. Catherine hadn't demanded it. The institution had offered it as acknowledgement of service. In the months that followed, Catherine's role within the monarchy became increasingly formal, not through any dramatic declaration, but through the simple reality that she was the most trusted, most respected, most visible representative of the crown. She was, in every meaningful sense, already queen. The crown simply made it official. King Charles, managing his health, gradually stepped back from frontline duties. But rather than creating a vacuum, Catherine and William filled it with such grace and capability that the transition seemed natural. The monarchy didn't collapse. It evolved. It adapted. It survived by recognizing that institutions persist not because of tradition alone, but because they embrace the people who can carry them forward. Camilla maintained her position, her dignity, and her grace. She had fought for what she believed in. She had lost, but she had also recognized when to let go. In her own way, she contributed to the transformation by eventually accepting it. By the end of 2026, the narrative had completely transformed. Catherine's crown was no longer a controversial topic. It was simply part of the institutional reality. She was the Princess of Wales. She wore her own crown, and that crown represented the monarchy's commitment to evolution, to service, and to recognizing excellence wherever it appeared. The crown, valued at approximately £4.2 million, became one of the most studied ceremonial objects in royal history. But its value wasn't monetary. Its value lay in what it represented, a monarchy willing to change, an institution recognizing its future leaders, a crown created not through bloodline alone, but through demonstrated capacity and earned respect. In the years that followed, Catherine would wear that crown at countless events, at Commonwealth summits, at charity galas, at diplomatic functions, at moments when the monarchy needed to project strength, wisdom, and grace, and every time she wore it, people understood that this was different. This crown meant something new. It meant that leadership was being recognized, that service was being honored, that the future of the monarchy lay not in maintaining the past, but in embracing the best of what it could become. Princess Anne, having orchestrated this transformation, eventually stepped back into her characteristic silence. But her legacy was clear. She had recognized that institutions survive by evolving. She had seen in Catherine a future worthy of support. And she had positioned that future so carefully, so deliberately, that it had become inevitable. The crown Catherine wore was ultimately Anne's gift to the monarchy. A gift recognizing that the best crowns are worn by those who never sought them.